Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled The Future of Treasury in the Digital Age. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the impact of digitalization on Treasury teams, as well as the need to scale up defensive technology and tactics to combat fraud. Our speakers for today are Baptiste, co-founder and CEO of Trustpair, and Craig Jeffery, founder and managing partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Baptiste and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us for this important topic. Baptiste, it's good to be on a webinar with you. Thanks for being part of it.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Craig.
Yeah, we're looking forward to today's topic. So, let's go to the section where we'll discuss today's agenda. So, as you can see, the topics of discussion, we've got 4 primary areas and then a key takeaways, a discussion at the end. We'll begin with the situation of technology, what's occurring, how there's been growth. So we'll look at the explosion of data, how that's had an impact, new connection types, faster, cheaper connections. But this comes along with new risks because companies are not the only ones taking advantage of the technology. Criminals are doing that as well. Then we'll move over to digitalization's impact on the Treasury function. I think we've all seen how technology makes changes, creates different challenges for companies. So first we'll look at how expectations have changed, how senior management and the board have different expectations on Treasury, on anybody involved in payments, and truly everyone in the finance function. Then we'll also look and cover some of the points about increased spend. Your peers are spending more on finance, on payments. There's plans to spend more and significantly more. There's a good reason for that. Then we'll move over to fraud, which is a core center of what we're having this discussion on about the impact of digitalization. We'll look at some of the trends and solutions. So, organizations, your organization, almost no matter what size you are, is being targeted by sophisticated and automated criminals. They're leveraging technology heavily. And this requires a robust defense, and that defense includes tools and technology. And then in the making a transition section, we'll talk about some of those tools, the technology that's required, and some of the changes that we have to put in place around people too. We'll focus on technology, but I think we all realize there's different elements to defending ourselves, to helping our organizations be more efficient as we scale. And at the end, the key takeaway section, that's where Baptiste and I will talk about some of the general thoughts and themes about fraud, the impact of new technology, the risks, the opportunities, and what needs to be done to use technology to protect our organization. So with that lengthy intro, or covering the table of contents, if you will, I'll begin with digitalization and then bring in Baptiste as we continue to move through the deck today. So what's the situation with digitalization? You've probably heard something like this. The amount of data that's created every 2 years it's doubled. The amount of data we have doubles every 2 years. So there's a 45% increase in data across all manner of devices. This is a key element of the explosion of data. The power of compute and the cost of compute continues to decline. We're familiar with that with systems like Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, the ability to use and scale. And so that technology has had many benefits, but make no mistake, the amount of data and the ability to harness that data matters. Connections and APIs move faster. They're better integrations. They move data and money at a more rapid pace. That also creates some opportunities. And we look at artificial intelligence and machine learning. Who hasn't played with ChatGPT and asked questions and found out that this can do better work than the interns we have in, and they do it in about a 100th, the 1,000th of the time. But it's not just Treasury professionals, finance professionals, and payment professionals who are using and leveraging artificial intelligence, generative AI. Criminals are using that as well. That's making things like spoofing emails far superior to what they were. If we think back 15 years ago, the emails were horrible. Someone was typing them like with their elbows. It was like English. If they were being received in English, it was like English as a fifth language, and nobody was fooled by them. They've gotten better and better, and now people are using these tools for code for better spoofing. And we could go on about the value of things like the network effect of being able to connect into bigger networks that have capabilities of supporting payments, finding suppliers. All of these are pretty significant situations with how digitalization has changed. Baptiste, I'm going to move on. If you had something you wanted to jump in, feel free to.
No, thank you, Craig. Thank you for setting the frame. I think it's a great introduction, and that will have plenty of occasion to details in the coming in the coming slides. So happy to deep dive in the next minutes.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so as we look at this, what are some of the areas of focus? We talked about some of the technology tools earlier, like artificial intelligence. You can see the graph on the bottom. At the top, when we think about some of the faster, the lower value payments in the US, we see significant increase over time of services like ACH and other electronic methods like virtual cards, et cetera. So 60% of your peers are planning to increase the use. As we,
I think, Craig, if I might here, I think it's super interesting because when we think about Treasury, the move from check specifically to digital means of payment is probably one of the biggest trends we see globally in the Treasury world. And when we think about risk, the risk associated with checks was quite high. I mean, people were thinking that when you ask them if the fraud on checks is a big issue for them, they say yes, but they are even more worried about the increase of ACH and wire because, when it comes to digital fraud on ACH and wire, it's even bigger threat. So that's super interesting because we see that was one of the main points raised by the audience on this survey, and that it appears to be one of the biggest opportunity, but as well biggest risk for Treasury teams in the coming years.
Yeah, that's really it. That's interesting, as well as the fact that fraud on ACH has grown as more companies have moved to ACH. Certainly during COVID, that pushed people, from checks to more digital means, and there is a focus. Yeah.
Yeah, and as well of course, when you move an entire vendor database to be paid from checks to ACH, all the data you have to handle at the same time, the transition is quite hard. And as you said very clearly, fraudsters are seeking these momentums, are seeking the moment when you will need to control all this data, and they will find a way to send you fraudulent data to do some scams, some business email compromise. So yeah, obviously big opportunity, but as well big threat.
Yeah, and this new focus. One of the famous American bank robbers, Willie Sutton, was asked the question, "Why do you rob banks?" And his answer was, "That's where the money is." And so, as we see transition from checks, paper items to electronic, criminals are going to go where the money is. Excellent points. We're going to move to our first poll question, and it's going to pop up on the screen. There's some instructions you can see in the chat box if you can't find it on your screen. The first poll has a double or a stacked question. The first one is all that apply. Which of the following payment methods does your organization use most? There might be a couple that are top, but go ahead and select one or two. And then the second question is a single choice. What is your expected use of checks in the coming year? Increase. The top one would be, any type of increase. I guess more than 10% or stay about the same. So within plus or minus 10%. And then you have the two decrease options. If you don't know, I would suggest you type about the same if you're not sure if there's any plans there. We'll give everybody a moment to select their choices and hit the submit button. And I see people are jumping the gun already, which is awesome in the chat box. If you would like to see the results of the poll question, if everybody will get them if we get enough responses, we're going to go ahead with 125 people if they type the word Trustpair in the chat box. So Trustpair is the way to go. Poll account as well, but Trustpair is the favorite word in that box. Well done. I see a lot of people plugging that in. I was going to ask them to type in Baptiste and spell it correctly, but I think Trustpair might be easier. All right. Baptiste, when this shows up, okay, I'd love to hear your comments on this, Baptiste.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
So we get, I'm not sure all the attendees can see the result or only us. Everybody can see it. Great, yeah. Thanks. So checks, 50% of respondents said that checks was the payment method which is the most used. I'm not surprised about this. We can definitely expect that it will be lower and lower for the reasons we mentioned, because companies are looking for efficiency and cost reductions. And of course, checks brings a lot of frictions and cost. ACH and wire are super high, and it's great. ACH 86%, wire 53%. Well, it just proved that digitalization is definitely on its ways in payment means. The question might be, are you really, do you feel safe using ACH and wire, or is that a concern today? And we usually see that when you look for digitalization, for optimization and less friction, sometimes you do not feel safe in terms of security, and that's normal, and that's what we used to see. So it would be as well great to see that. In terms of what is your expected use of checks in coming years? Increase more. We have 5% who of the respondents who expect to use more checks in the coming years. I will be more than happy to have the reasons for that. And stay the same, 45%. Decrease more 10 to 25%, and decrease more than 25% represents globally 50%. So we have 50% of the audience who expect to decrease its use of checks. So it will mean that less checks are probably more ACH and more wire. So well, new opportunities, new risk as well to take up. Thanks all for participating to this poll.
So as we move on to what's the impact of digitalization, how is that creating a change? I'll start on these, and then Baptiste, you can jump in.
Yes.
The impact.
No, I'm happy to let you comment, Craig. Happy to jump in.
Okay. Yeah. So the first part that we're talking about is, what are the expectations of management? There is an expectation that companies will be far more efficient and scalable, that they'll provide adequate and appropriate payment security. The expectation on Treasury as the superintendent of payments, and by default, the superintendent of payment security, is that they'll protect the organization's most liquid assets. And so these elements of efficiency, elements of security and risk management are at the forefront from organizations. We hear that from clients directly. We see that in polls and surveys. I know you live this world, Baptiste, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, obviously, when you ask the top management what they expect from any investment, is some better efficiency, better security, better everything. And especially in terms of digitalization, I think what we see here is that all the classic topics around Treasury, so how you plan better, how you forecast better, is really probably the key thing that any treasurer, any CFO has in mind, and doing all this and managing the cash on the daily basis safely is the second one. So we see clearly that, of course, these 2 points are really on the top of the list: payment security, liquidity planning, and forecasting, and it's absolutely not surprising. Overall, I guess when you talk about any finance people, is the way you think is about risk management. The purpose of any finance department, any treasury team, is to balance the risk between the opportunity and the associated risk. And this is what the purpose of our jobs, in fact, as finance specialists. So, well, it's quite legitimate. The question is, when you want everything, you need to as well balance your expectations sometimes. And again, this is the same. How do you find the opportunity? How do you catch the opportunity of digitalization and ensure at the same time that you keep manage your risk at the highest level possible? And this is what will be tackled in the next slides, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that, Baptiste. As we continue the view of what's the impact, is there's increased expectations due to the environment. There's also increased need for technology spend, the use of technology tools, and the use of skills to manage our organizations in light of the new threat, in light of the increased expectations, and what we need to deliver for our organization. Baptiste, you live most of your life in the financial tech world here. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, of course, you can't imagine any scalability, any efficiency without digitalization and without investing. And of course, you have to invest in tech. That's right, and this is what we see here, because financial technology brings everything we discussed. So efficiency, sometimes more security, etc. As well, it allows you to take a new risk, and fraud is clearly one of the booming risks for any finance department and treasury team. And so we see clearly that the spend in fraud and security solutions is clearly on top of mind of any CFO today. Even if, well, even when you have an economic turn down, you need to keep investing in that, because if you don't, well, you expose your organization to higher risk in the future. So this is really a clear trend that we see. The expectation in terms of investment in financial tools and security and fraud solutions are really high. But as well, the opportunity of digitalization for any finance team is as well the opportunity to, it comes with new requirements in terms of skill sets, in terms of human organization. And when you invest in tech, you have to think about what does it take for the organization globally, for the team, and you have a change management to have in mind, and probably new people to have in the team, or people to be trained to adapt to the new organization. And it's not like you're adding new tools, it's you're thinking about how the whole organization will work globally. And human is a huge part of the equation to get the best result from any digital project and transformation project.
Excellent. So yeah, so those two areas, the last point on here about innovation requires new skill sets. I think, it doesn't matter which age cohort you're part of, whether you're a Gen Z or you're a boomer, all of those experiences, no matter how long you've been in the workforce, this technology is changing what we have to do and how we have to think about things, not only individually, but from a departmental and a company standpoint. We need the new skill sets to leverage the technology and to combat issues like fraud. So achieving efficiency, ensuring security requires a range of new skill sets. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But right now, we get to go to our second set of poll questions. And hopefully, if everybody can see everything fine, just it looks like most people are seeing it fine. If there's any continuing issue, please send a note in the chat box just to make sure. But this question is fraud experience. Over the past 2 years or 24 months, we have experienced one instance of fraud, experienced more than one instance of fraud, not experienced fraud, I don't know, and then other. And I think we need about 6 more trust pairs in the chat box to hit our 25, and Brian will keep us total to the top. So there we go. And we're passed. So excellent. No more need to type that in the chat box. But as you go ahead and select the response to the poll and hit submit, Brian has also posted something in the chat box. He'll post it again about following Trustpair on LinkedIn. That's a great way to follow Trustpair on LinkedIn. Click on the link, go ahead and accept and follow Trustpair. You can keep current on their activities. We'd also invite you to follow Strategic Treasure and CTM File. CTM File is Strategic Treasure's news and media site on payments, on treasury, finance, and economics. So we'll post that up again. So it's a great way to stay connected, makes our marketing teams happy. And thank you for those responses. Baptiste, yeah, I do. This is, as a provider of security functions, the fact that 68% have had one or more in the last 2 years, I think is it shows the seriousness of the problem here. Any comments?
Yes, of course. No, well, we all know that fraud is not a small concern. Fraud is booming, and this poll just proves this massive issue. We see that it's interesting because I don't know, proves that maybe not, but we don't know. And there is no such thing that if you don't know if a risk exists or not, you should know. And you should have a way to know that, in fact. And I guess tech allows people to know what they don't know. Stop being blind about this topic. And it's super important. And it doesn't mean that you're not involved enough if you don't know. It means that maybe this is something that you should be aware of, because fraud isn't top of mind of any finance leader today. And so this is definitely, I think an interesting point, and that probably that the organization, how the organization works today, do not allow you to have access to this information, and I guess it's crucial for to manage the risk. So yeah, I'm not surprised about how many people and companies have been hit by fraud over the last years. Honestly, we see, and we'll see in the next slide, that it's generally more than around 60% to 80% of companies that are hit by fraud. So the general, I guess, outcome from this is every company is exposed to fraud today, and so the concern should be on top of mind of any finance leader.
Yeah, I think that every company is exposed to fraud. Companies that weren't exposed to fraud in the past because it was more manual, they maybe weren't as a big enough fish to go after because of the level of automation. Those companies can be caught up because there's no limit to the scale that automation can approach. But thanks for your comments there, and back to you on offense and defense.
Yeah, so the context of fraud generally is we see 2 different periods around fraud. Over the last decade, fraud used to be super manual. So it was like a CEO scam, CFO scam. You receive a fake invoice, you receive a phone call from a fake CFO saying, hey, please, I really trust you. I know you're super involved in your job, and I trust on you. We have a super important payment to make. We have an acquisition, and you are the only one who need to know that, etc. And it seems crazy, but it worked, and it keep working. But what we have seen over the last years is much more complex fraud schemes because cyber attacks used to be involved in the vast majority of frauds today. And so we see that business email compromise is really one of the top fraud attempts reported by companies in general. And it's super hard to identify this business email compromise because, as you said, Craig, a few years ago, before digitalization, not, but before AI, etc., you could notice that the English was not correct. So yeah, maybe it was quite easy to identify that. You could identify that the domain used to send the email was not the one of your vendor or of your supplier. So you could identify that. But today, we see that thanks to cyber attacks, fraudster can really take the control of your vendor email and send you an email. So it will be a legitimate email and a real email sent by or through the real email domain of your vendor. So it's super hard to identify that, and the wording, the spelling is correct. So it seems legitimate, but it's not. And so how can you identify that? It's super hard, in fact, and that just proven this single point, I guess, that the offense and the defense are absolutely not equal. They are fighting. Fraudsters are criminal organization today. It's like very well organized. It's not someone in its garage, doing its own things on Sunday evening. It's like really very well organized criminal organizations, and they are using very sophisticated tools. And at the opposite, you see that any financing is still fighting with manual processes to control data. That's not fair, I mean, in terms of offense and defense. So business email compromise is the first one. System compromise is quite similar, but it can happen in your own system or in the system of your vendor as well. The issue, if it comes to your system, is you can trust your data. You can trust that the data hosted in your own systems, in your own ERP, is clean or not. We see a lot of cases from companies coming to us saying, okay, we had a cyber attacks or we had a breach, and we just would like to ensure that the data we have in our system is still clean, that the bank accounts are really owned by our vendors, and there is no risk of fraud associated to this data. So system compromise are really a huge threat as well. Invoice fraud, classic one. You receive an invoice, it's a fake one. A few years ago, it was quite easy to see that it was modified, it has been modified, and it was quite clear. But today, again, frauds are super well done, and so it's hard to read them. Overall, what is complex with all these digital ways of fraud is the volume. You have so many vendors to control. You have so many emails that you receive, so many data to control at the end of the day, that it's not possible with a human organization to control correctly all this data. Even if you are super well organized, etc., well, you're fighting with manual means while they're fighting with cyber means. Classic on the right, CEO fraud, account takeover, vendor fraud. This is all time things, I guess you all know. Behind each fraud, there is a theft of identity. So the question you have to think about is, how can I be sure that the person I'm talking to is the right one? How can I validate the identity of this person? And how can I ensure that the bank details associated with this vendor or this person is correct. And it's super hard. Vendor fraud, account takeover, CEO fraud, we see deep fake, deep voices that are used. And so even if you have a call with someone, the voice could seem that the one of your boss, the one of the CFO, etc. But it will not be him, and it's almost impossible to identify that, or it will require a lot of other manual processes that you can't afford because you are limited organizations.
Baptiste, thanks for that. There's a question that came in about where does data theft and compromise fall in the context of fraud. I'll take that one. So when we think about fraud, there's the I convince you to send money. So the spoofing types of fraud like BEC and CEO fraud, to give up credentials or to give up payments. So it's a convincing them. It's the I gain control of a system or an account, and therefore I can control that money is sent out. The other types of fraud, so I steal data and sell it, or I take data and lock down data like ransomware, and I use that to amplify the urgency. Those are some of the common playbook options that exist with the criminal. So it falls in the in one of those chains. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think Baptiste, I think you can probably continue on the scary. I guess everybody knows how bad fraud is, but it's good to go over the statistics to see how serious it is across the board.
Yeah, so I think it resonates with the poll that we had a couple of minutes ago. 56% of US companies were targeted at least by one fraud attempt in 2022. If you add the companies, 12% of companies were targeted at least 10 times. And while you can start to reach quite a high rate of companies that are exposed and actually really that are hit by fraud attempts last year. So as I said, no company can think that they are out of the target of from the fraudster, and I think what we see here, that saying that 56% of companies think that fraud will increase in 2023. There is a good understanding of that trend. In fact, that because of the technology, it will be quite a wave. In fact, fraud was historically something that was really precise. So fraudster used to focus on a company. Now it's like they are shooting wide, and are just using tools that allow them to identify some breaches, and once they found a breach, they focus on it. But they can so target thousands of companies at the same time, and that makes company understand that they are exposed to the fraud of risk, the risk of fraud. Another very interesting point, and that proves that the battle is not fair. 70% of companies use phone calls to check supplier credential changes or control generally vendor details. Well, again, fighting with manual processes, with all what we detailed over the past slide, saying that fraudsters are using digital tools and you're still using a phone, which is probably a digital phone, but still much less sophisticated than the tool used by the fraudster who try to get you. And I guess that proved the trend in terms of fraud. 55% of successful fraud attempts was perpetrated through credential or informational changes. So in the vast majority of frauds, the issue is someone will try to send you an information that you will use for payment, and you will pay a fraudulent bank account while you are convinced that you are paying a vendor. And so it's all about data. It's all about how you are sure that at the end of the day, the data you have in your systems is correct. How you're sure that the data you have in your systems is never outdated, and that if it is, you are alerted and you can take the measure to clean it.
Right. So that brings us to technology and training. These are the two sides to perhaps the same coin, one on tech and one on the human component. Why don't you start us off on the tech side, and I'll close out the human firewall side.
Yeah, so of course, and I'm as you said, I'm the tech side, but in any organization, tech is never the only solution, and human is never the only solution. It's how you balance tech and human, because business is about humans. So how do you equip human to help them on the daily basis to do their job better in a safer way? And this is the role of tech. So in any good risk management project, you have to think about what is the role of the tech layer, what is the role of the human layer, and at the end of the day, how the tech enhances the human to help him focus on what matters, where is the highest value you can get from a human, and the tech can drive the human to focus on what matters. So tech security components, of course, you have a multiple things that you need to have in your mind when you think about preventing fraud. Of course, all the classic cyber prevention tools, firewall, antivirus, ensure that the access to your tools are safe by multi-factor authentication. When it comes to vendor credentials, bank account validation of your vendors, stop relying on manual process, just rely on technology and automate these controls to focus on what can't be automated. Always ensure that the data hosted in your vendor database, globally it should be on the ERP side, is continuously under monitoring. Probably what we see today is vendors are controlled only when they are onboarded, and then all the data is let on in the ERP, but is not monitored. It is not rechecked over time, and this is a huge pain because data has a quite short lifetime value. And so if you wait, just the quality of the data in your ERP will go down and down and down. So you need to check this. This is why you need a continuous vendor database monitoring. And of course, you need to ensure that the different tools you are using are well embedded, are talking to each other. It was the first slide of the presentation was about the use of API. We didn't comment that much, but of course, today, thanks to the last digitalization opportunities, tools are much more easier to integrate, and it's a key part of any fraud prevention project, because you need to avoid any breach in your payment chain, and ensure that tools are connected and talking to each other is highly important. Craig, do you want to comment the human part?
Yeah, sure, surely. Yeah, the other side of the coin, the human security components, what some of our friends refer to as the human firewall. What needs to take place? Well, people need to be skilled in not only using current tools, but on fraud and security generally, but also on payment security and payment processes. And we have quite a few bit of statistics on how companies that have people trained do far better, have far lower rates of fraud than those who are not trained. Now, that was a little more apparent a few years back when on the corporate side, it was less than half of companies had training. Now it's well above 80% have fraud and security training. The distinction now falls into those who have payment security training. So we oftentimes saw the differences. It was somewhere around 2 or 2.5 times more fraud to 5 times more fraud in different areas for those companies that lacked training. And so those are pretty significant. And so it's training and testing because let's face it, we have a lot of things we have to get trained on, and people will rush through training. And we see that with some training that we have. Is people take the first test, they figure they can just guess the answers because they're all logical, and then the majority fail the first course they take, and then go, oh, okay, I really have to know some of the points of distinction. And so this idea of constantly upgrading the team makes a lot of sense. And so more and more companies, more banks are requiring training more than once a year. And that's also flowing into the corporate world where they're updating the human firewall more frequently than once a year, just continuing to stay current as opposed to a single event once a year. And so that flows into segregation of duties, the principle of least privilege, where you lock people out of certain things, all part of your internal control framework. Those are essential. So just like if you don't update your firewall in your browser, you're going to run into more and more problems as that gets unupdated. The same is true of the humans. And so this is that we have to have layers to protect our organizations, and the layers include technology layers and human security layers.
I guess what we see as well is people need to be aware of not only their piece of the puzzle, but understand what happens before, what happened after, especially in the payment chain, because we see that, of course, segregation of duties is super important, but sometimes people believe that they are not doing the control, but someone else is doing the control. And so if, in fact, everybody believes that the control is done by someone else, well, there is no control at the end of the day. And so this is how you have a fraud, because of course there is someone doing this control. It's not me, but someone else will do that. So providing in the training the global picture of who does what, and not just, well, this is your responsibility, but be aware of who is the person before you in the process, and who is the person after you in the process, is highly important, because that's allow all the individuals to be aware and feel concerned about the overall security and the overall process, and guarantee the safety of the organization at the end of the day. Yeah, we see that it's really important to ensure people are aware of the global process.
Yeah, that comprehensive view is important. I think you put your finger right on the issue. Is people think, well, somebody else is doing that, and they may not be doing it. Sometimes there was a problem, and so 2 or 3 people are doing this double and triple checking, and so there can be this false sense of assurances. Well, other people are checking, I can just pencil whip or push something along because I know someone else will catch it. And what happens is, people get more lax. There should be accountability, segregation of duties, and limiting that exposure, as Baptiste was talking about. So,
so I guess technology can help on this. This is really important, because technology provides the ability to share the information over the organization. Finance teams used to be siloed between, if you take the overall chain, P2P, so procurement, AP, treasury. Sometimes you have another layer with a vendor management team. So it's a lot of people involved in a process, a lot of people involved in treating the data or a piece of the data, and they do not access to the same tools. So accessing to the information is hard. And as you said, yeah, you can believe that the control has been done before. If you add a layer of technology that allows you to be sure that the process has been respected, that the control has been done, well, you streamline the whole process, because if someone failed to do the control, or if the control still need to be done. And this really provide accessing this information really allow to streamline the whole process, but as well secure the whole process.
You know, as you were saying that, I was thinking of, you know, what is technology good at? What are people good at? If you have a technology system that enforces the behavior, that can be far superior to someone saying, I have to do all these steps, but the control is in my head and in the discipline of what I do, because I can lose a step if I'm supposed to do it. Maybe I don't run across it very often. And so technology can ensure certain steps are completed, and then it can reduce the amount of things people have to look at. And so when the system has identified something to be reviewed, it's much more of an exception, and people exhibit more care as opposed to looking at 5,000 items. They're looking at 3 or 4 and can do the due diligence there. All right, our last group of poll questions is now on the screen. We currently use the following controls for fraud. Check all that apply. So there's automated bank validation, employee training with testing, without testing, continuous vendor database monitoring. I won't read all of them. Multi-factor authentication, out-of-band validation, all of those. Just click all that apply and hit submit. And once you're done with that, again, I just remind you that there's the ability to follow Trustpair, Strategic Treasure, and CTM file. Clicking into the box. We have enough responses. Really appreciate the enthusiasm. We have enough in the chat box. So yeah, perfect. So everybody will get the responses to the poll question, the summary poll question. So go ahead and answer those. Click submit, and Brian will post it when we have enough people who've responded. Right. Baptiste, number 1 is firewall and antivirus. I'm a little concerned that the number is 80%, but sometimes people may not know how much of a firewall or antivirus exists in a company. That's number 1, which is probably lower than it is, of course. Multi-factor authentication, over the past few years, that has really risen significantly. That's about at the same level. As you look at these items, do you have any comments that you wanted to make?
I see two things. As you said, firewall and antivirus are not a concern of treasurer or finance teams, more on the CISO side. So there are teams who are in charge of deploying all this for the whole organization. Multi-factor authentication, so you say single sign-on, is as well usually something deployed over the whole organization. But when it comes to choose a tool for specifically the finance teams or the treasury team, of course, it starts to be an important point. So I see, so the answers for the global tools you'll use around the whole organization, and the specific tools used by finance teams. And when I see automated bank account validation used by 50%, this is a choice usually made by the finance teams. And I guess continuous vendor database monitoring as well is the same kind of tools. And then employee training, we see that it's quite used by in the vast, more than the majority, and the majority of the cases, 55%. You have training. I would have expect more, honestly. So 55 plus 26, we are 55%, 75% overall, but still there is 25% who should have at least a training each year, I guess. And then, yeah, it's interesting. I would say automated bank account validation. My question would be, how do you do that, and what is covered? We'll see, and I guess this is the next slide. But when it comes to find a tool to prevent fraud over the organization, the coverage is one of the main points, and automation used to be Oh, that's great. Thank you. Used to be quite good on the locals, on the local level. I mean, to control some vendors in the US. But when it comes to international, it used to be much more complex. So if you have to choose for a fraud prevention tool over as a finance team, just think about different points. The three first points I would like to focus on are the geographical coverage. You need to ensure that the tool you're using can allow you to cover the vast majority of your vendors, and because usually when it comes to international vendors, it's much more complex to control because you don't speak the same language, because you don't share the same time zone, because there are a lot of criteria that will not allow you to do the control, manual control, safely and confidently. So geographical coverage is highly important. Second one is collaborative features. As I said, finance teams are siloed over different teams. Treasurer are a very important piece of the fraud prevention, but you can't own the topic. I mean, you are at the end of the payment chain, but you are not the one in charge of this control, basically. You are the one in charge of sending the payments to the bank. And so we see that treasurer used to take the lead to find a tool and to engage all the finance team globally, AP, sometimes procurement around that. And so collaboration is a key part of the tool that you need to find, because you need to ensure that everybody who need to access to the data, access to the same tool, and that it answers to your needs. Not only one tool for treasury, one tool for AP, one tool for procurement. You need to have this layer and everybody is using the same tool or access to the tool to ensure that the data is correct and that the process has been respected. User experience, I guess, is highly important today, because if the tool you are using do not provide a nice user interface, etc., your team will not use it on the long term, or they will have some issues, friction to use the tool. So of course, user experience is very important. Fourth point, I would say systems. You have to be sure that the tool you will choose is embedded in your existing tools. You should not replace all your tools. You should find something that come on top of your P2P suite. So the ERP, the treasury system, and that can easily integrate this tool. So you really streamline the process and you do not add friction. So easy integration, how systems are communicating, it shows us. And then, of course, security, but I'm sure your security team will have a high look, deep focus on this part, ensure that SSO is available and can match with your organization, that you provide all the requirements in terms of security. Last but not the least, as we said, training and testing. Ensure that the people who should use the tool have the good training, that they understand the overall process, that at the end of the day, the tool answer they need and engage them around the why they should use this tool and the global purpose of using this tool. It should not be a constraint. It should really be like how this tool helps me on my daily basis. And this is the purpose of digitalization: bring opportunities and not frictions.
Excellent. Thanks, Baptiste. A lot of great points about tools, people. When we think about people, processes, technology, and structures, these are some of the key components. That brings us to the final thought section, a bit of a summary. I'll start and have you say a few things, Baptiste. You know, the movement towards automation and digitalization is impacting jobs from an efficiency standpoint, a control, and a risk standpoint. Expectations are changing. Criminals are certainly leveraging the technology, and they're leveraging tools And so our defense has to include the different layers, including technology tools and the human element. And so since the attackers are more sophisticated and continually upgrading, we have to make sure we're using tools and upgrading the tools, and we're upgrading the human element to upgrading people. There's not a defensible position to say we've reached a certain level of care in our payment controls, and therefore we're set. We don't have to pay attention for 3 or 4 years. We always have to monitor it. So tools and people are some of the key areas in this era of increased digitalization. I'll give you the last word, Baptiste.
No, I guess it was a nice conclusion. As we say on the last point, there is no statu quo today. You need to embrace digitalization. There is no other movement. So just be curious about what can be done and how can digitalization help you doing your job better, how to be more efficient and seize the opportunity of for all these tools, especially in terms of fraud prevention. I mean, the risk is massive today and is keep increasing. So there are a lot of options outside, and Trustpair is probably a very good one as well to help treasurers to streamline the whole process, to focus on what matters, to ensure that people really at the end of the day are really taking the best of their position and focusing on what on value-added tasks and not on only manual processes.
Thank you so much, Baptiste. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us talk about this really key topic. Really enjoyed it. I'll turn it back over to Brian for some concluding important announcements.
Thank you, Baptiste and Craig, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP and FP&A credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on the future of Treasury in the digital age, be sure to download the new white paper by Trustpair and Strategic Treasurer by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.